time to return to our misadventures. Don Quixote is on his old horse with his rusty spear, and he's going to take on the world. And that's because of one person, Miguel de Cervantes, and that's who we will be talking about today as we look further into our story, our literature section this month. And it's just a really kind of playful, interesting story, but I think it has quite a bit more to it than just being playful. Wouldn't you say so?
Oh, absolutely. It's a very interesting character study. It's a very interesting exploration of friendship, the meaning of friendship. As we mentioned earlier, it's also one of the very first that I can think of depictions of someone with mental illness in a story. I mean, considering the story is 500 or so years old, and even now writing about characters with mental illness is something that we're seeing a bit more as people appreciate, mental health a bit more in the modern era. But to consider that there was this Spanish guy writing about this character who, although kind of funny and ridiculous and comedic in parts, is also kind of a sad character, right? Because Don Quixote is lost in his own mind. He's lost in his own fantasies. And it's only through the loyalty of his good friend Sancho Panza that he is really able to sort of live out those fantasies. Obviously, back then, they didn't have mental health experts. They didn't have psychology or drugs that he could take to sort of control the fantasies. But Don Quixote is definitely not totally independent of his mind, I think it's safe to say. So it's an interesting topic, and it also makes for a very, very entertaining book, as proven by the fact that here we are still talking about it 500 years later. So let's find out the reason why we're talking about it, and that would be find out about the author who wrote it, Miguel de Cervantes.
Let's do that, and before we do that, why don't we take a brief moment and listen to the entire section today. Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, is often hailed as one of the greatest Spanish writers. Born into a poor family in 1547, he led a life as thrilling and unpredictable as that of his famous character Don Quixote. Although there is no record of him attending university, Cervantes was extensively well-read. In his youth, he traveled to Rome, where he further enriched his knowledge and dived deeply into Renaissance art and literature. At the age of 23, Cervantes joined the Spanish Navy in Naples and displayed great bravery during the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Although he fought bravely, he suffered severe injuries that resulted in the loss of the use of his left hand. After his recovery, Cervantes resumed his military services. However, his life took a dramatic turn in 1575 when he was kidnapped by pirates and endured 5 years of slavery in Algeria. During this challenging time, he made several escape attempts and aided his fellow captives. He eventually regained his freedom after being ransomed and returned to Spain. Back in his homeland, Cervantes decided to try his hand at writing. In 1605, he published the first volume of Don Quixote, which is often considered the first modern European novel. His diverse experiences, from military engagements to pirate encounters, significantly influenced his writing. The second volume followed in 1615, during a period marked by Spain's political and economic decline from its golden age. These historical contexts are crucial for understanding the novel's themes of idealism versus realism, as Don Quixote blends fantasy and madness with real historical events and social critique. This combination challenges traditional literary classifications. So our author is Miguel de Cervantes, and he is the author of Don Quixote, and he is often hailed as one of the greatest Spanish writers. He was born into a poor family in 1547, and he led a life as thrilling and unpredictable as that of his famous character Don Quixote. So he had a life that was also full of adventure, maybe not misadventure, but definitely adventure, because he had a very thrilling and unpredictable life. We're going to go into it, but if something is thrilling, it means it's very exciting. And if something is unpredictable, it means it's turning out differently than the way you thought it was going to be, or you're unable to figure out how it's supposed to turn out. Like you might have an unpredictable ending to a movie where up until the very end, you don't know who done it. You don't know who the murderer was. So it's difficult for you to predict. And although there is no record of him attending university, our author, Cervantes was extensively well-read. Well-read meaning you have read a lot of different novels on a lot of different subjects. You have a breadth of knowledge from all of these readings. And for me personally, sitting in a room with Mike, I would have to say that I feel like he is very well-read. He might have an opinion of what well-read means himself.
Yeah, you read a lot of books, basically.
You do.
And I guess it would also mean you've probably taught yourself a lot. You've learned a lot. So you're not just sitting around reading, Harry Potter over and over again.
Harry Potter.
You're probably, not that Harry Potter's bad, but you probably have a wide range of interests. You've read a lot of books. There's a fancy word we might also use for someone like Miguel de Cervantes, especially back then when, universities were not common. They were expensive. You often had to travel long distances to another city to attend one. But people could, if they had access to books, teach themselves. An autodidact, A-U-T-O-D-I-D-A-C-T,
Yeah.
D-I-D-A-C-T, autodidact, didact. Yeah, a self-taught person, basically. That's all he is. He attended university, but he set his own program. He had no teachers. The library was his teacher. So that's kind of the idea here. But in his youth, he traveled to Rome. So, unlike many people back then, he had traveled a little bit. He'd left Spain, probably traveled by boat across the Western Mediterranean there to Rome. So, and that would be, of course, a big cultural center. At that time, of course, also the location of the Roman Catholic Church and whatnot. So he further enriched his knowledge. We should also point out this period, 1500, right? Now we're talking about Michelangelo, we're talking about Da Vinci. This is the Renaissance. So this was a time of knowledge when people were rediscovering the great Roman masters and the great Roman writers and all that stuff. So a lot of people were learning a lot and really exploring the world of ideas and intellectual pursuits. And so he was very, very much like people of his time. And so he traveled to Rome where a lot of this exciting stuff was happening and where, of course, they had more books. And it says he further enriched his knowledge and dived deeply into Renaissance art and literature. So in the same way that maybe today he would be heading off to Silicon Valley to try to, have his own startup or something like that, he's going to the place where all the smart people are going to hang out with them and to sort of absorb that atmosphere of knowledge and learning. But he also had adventures along the way. It says at the age of 23, so still a young man, Cervantes joined the Spanish Navy in Naples and displayed great bravery during the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. So he joined the military, not in a formal way. Back then, you could kind of volunteer and just sort of do it when you're not busy on your farm or something if you want to help out the country. And of course, the map of Europe at that time was different from what it was today. So joining the Spanish Navy in the Italian city of Naples would have been a thing back then. Of course, now you would be joining the Italian Navy if you're in Naples because it's in Italy. But I guess back then, maybe Spain controlled the city of Naples, which was a big trading port and did change hands. I think the British ended up running Naples in the 1800s a little bit later. Anyway, so he joined the Navy, and he had some exciting adventures. He saw action, as we would say today, and he displayed or showed great bravery. He got into battle, and he didn't run away and cry and hide in the bottom of the boat. No, he was out there fighting along with all the other sailors and soldiers at the famous Battle of Lepanto in 1571, which I believe was between the Spanish and the Venetians, because Venice at the time was also a great, powerful city-state. But it was a big naval battle during that period. And although it says he fought bravely, right? He was a brave guy. He didn't run away. He did fight. He suffered severe injuries that resulted in the loss of the use of his left hand. Oh, my goodness. So during the battle, as he was fighting the enemy, he got a bad blow, a bad shot, maybe a cut from a sword to his left arm or left hand. I don't know. I don't think the left hand was cut off, but maybe the nerve damage and bone damage was so great that basically he couldn't use his left hand for the rest of his life. So hopefully he was a right-handed writer.
I would hope so, for
sure. Or he learned. I guess he can learn.
Just a quick note on Naples. If you know of Naples, it's down further south from Rome, quite a bit further south, but not to the tip of the boot. It's kind of in between Rome and the tip of the boot in Italy. And the one thing you might know from Naples is Neapolitan pizza or pizza Neapolitana, which is basically like a margarita almost. It has raw tomatoes, fresh mozzarella cheese, basil, and olive oil. So if you've heard of the Neapolitana, pizza Neapolitana, then you probably have heard of that because of Naples. Getting back into our story, the injury caused him a lot of damage. He lost the use of his left hand. And after his recovery, Cervantes resumed his military services. So he didn't say, okay, I got hurt. I'm done. I'm finished. I'm never going to do anything with this again. He instead went back. He started again. He resumed. He continued on from where he was before. A lot of times when you think of the word resume, you might think of resuming your video game. If you've saved it and stored it for later, you go back in and you resume. You start off where you were last time. And that's kind of what he did. He did not go back to being a private or a lower level in the military. It looks like he resumed his time in the military and probably just went right back to what he did. You start again. However, his life took a dramatic turn in 1575 when he was kidnapped by pirates and endured 5 years of slavery in Algeria. So he was kidnapped. He was taken away by force. A lot of times when you think of somebody being kidnapped, you might actually think of a younger person being kidnapped. But anytime someone is taken away by force against their will and held against their will and unable to get free and are not being let go, then that person has been kidnapped. And he was kidnapped not by just regular guys, he was kidnapped by pirates. So you know that any pirate, if they're going to ever let you go, is only going to do it probably for money. More than likely, they're going to kidnap you and use you to make you a worker for them at that time, or just kill you because they could. And he was pretty lucky that he was able to survive 5 years of slavery. He endured it. It means he had to deal with something that was difficult. When you're enduring something, you're not just like going, yay, I'm a slave. This is fun. This is something that is really hard that you have to get through. A lot of times when you think of the word endure, you might think of enduring 4 years of university studies to get your degree, or enduring 5 years of work to get your basic level of skills to be able to change to a new job. You're going through that period of time. You don't love it. Sometimes, though, enduring means kind of more to the extreme side of it being really, really, really difficult. So imagine being a slave for 5 years. And he was a slave in Algeria, which is a North African country that is a little bit between Spain and Italy to the south, in the north area of Africa there. During this challenging time, he made several escape attempts and aided his fellow captives. So he tried to get away multiple times. It was a challenging time, difficult time. That's why it's something he's enduring. He tried to escape, and he also helped the other guys that were held captive with him, that were other captives. If you're held captive, you are a captive. You are unable to escape. He eventually regained his freedom after being ransomed and returned to Spain. So he was ransomed. People paid money to get him free, and that's when you are ransomed. You pay a ransom. Normally the kidnappers will say, there is a ransom. If you want this person back, you need to pay X million dollars and we will give you this person back. So somebody, I don't know who, paid his ransom and he was able to return to Spain. We are going to return for the next paragraph in just a couple minutes, but first let's listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天带大家看了唐吉訶德。Well, anyway, 它就是西班牙文的 Don Quixote。这个故事啊，这故事好像有点搞笑，对不对？其实它真的不是搞笑，它有点反讽的意味。但是唐吉訶德传记其实因为这就很有名嘛，而且好几百年的作品，所以我们要好好探讨一下作者他是有什么样特殊的背景，他可以创作出这么样划时代的一个文学作品呢？ 从第一段我们就看到，这个堂吉诃德的作者啊，其实就是 Miguel 的 Cervantes。这个 Miguel 呢，米格尔塞万提，他就是被誉为西班牙最伟大的作者之一了。其实他在1547年就出生呢，在第一段第二句出现一个分词构句哦 ，born into， be born into， 人被出生于什么家庭？谁？逗点之后的 he 才是主词。好，所以这个分词构句我们就不要管它省略什么连接词了。总而言之，就是连接词省略了，把很多资讯都在一起了，用最少的字多讲点概念。be 动词 ing 也删掉了。出生在一个很穷困的家庭，而且就在16世纪中1547年的时候，作者啊，其实过着一个什么样的生活呢？这个第一段的第二句很重要。除了一开始我们提到的是分词构句，逗点之后的主要子句当中，我们先把 lead a 什么样的 life 这个片语抓出来。 lead 是 led 的动词原形，过一个什么样的生活， lead a 加形容词再修饰 life。 可这个形容词因为很长嘛，所以调到后面当中呢又带了一个 as 的句型。好，我们看形容词是什么？形容词是两个用 and 连接起来， thrilling and unpredictable。 再来 as 我们把它抓出来，像什么一样的如何如何，那个像啊是第二个 as。 前面第一个 as 呢是没有意义的，它只是用来告诉读者，我在这句当中我要用一个比喻的手法来比喻出形容词 thrilling and unpredictable它到底是什么样的一个具体的状况。所以 as 的这个比喻的句型是第二个 as 才有像的意思。再来还有一个重点哦，像什么呢？像 that 是什么？这个代名词指的是 life 这个字，可是不是作者的生活，而是堂吉诃德的生活。所以在一个句子当中，如果我们第二次提到同样的字眼，例如在这句话当中是 life， 我们不能用 it 的原因是它不是在讲原本作者的生活，我们看到的是堂吉诃德的生活，所以只能用另外一个代替同种类但是不同的这个代名词叫做 that 单数。希望这个句子大家能有所了解了。好，接下来我们就看到可以往下看咯。那既然是这个作者啊跟堂吉诃德一样，他的生活经验一生啊都是非常的惊险，然后充满着变数，但是为什么是这样子呢？而且为什么他可以写出这样的作品？他不是出生在一个很贫穷的家庭，难道他还读过大学吗？没有第一段第三句告诉我们是没有记录他有读过大学啦，可是他非常的博学。这第三句最后一个字的 well read 这个字要特别把它抓出来，注意发音哦， well read 很博学，就是饱览群书。那为什么呢？因为第四句啊告诉我们其实他有去过罗马哦，而在罗马呢他就丰富了自己的知识，而且还研究文艺复兴啊、艺术啊、文学等等作品。那当然在这边逗点之后的 where 到句尾，我们知道它是个关系子句嘛，可是 where 它是个关副词哦，后面的 he 到句尾的地方是完整的句子，没有少主词也没有少受词，所以 where 你要把它翻成 and in which and in Rome 而在罗马的时候。我们这一些动作啊经常做之后啊，你就可以很熟练的看得出关系子句、限定用法关系子句，或者是它是关代还是关副。接着我们就要往下看咯。那之后啊，到了23岁的时候，到了第二段。23岁的时候呢，这个塞万提斯啊，也就是作者啊，他加入了海军，但是他又受伤，然后而且是受重伤哦。然后后来呢，又被海盗绑架，整个的生命啊，是真的是非常的挫折，而且非常的充满着变数。那当然他因为有一个骑士精神嘛，所以他在海军当中是英勇作战，不过就是受到严重的伤害。在第二段第二句这边啊，有一个限定用法的关系子句， 先行词是逗点之后的 severe injuries， 后面带着 that 到句尾。that 呢，指的就是这个严重的伤害，让他左手啊就失去了使用的功能。后来不是又被这个海盗绑架吗？然后呢，被绑架了，做了5年的奴役哦。但是他在其中呢，数度啊尝试着逃离，而且也会帮助同样被俘的囚友。那之后他是被赎出来，回到西班牙重获自由。
All right, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. So we are back in his homeland. That is who is back in his homeland. Cervantes is. He is back to the country where he was born, the land where he was born, the place of his birth. That's your homeland, where you come from. Cervantes decided to try his hand at writing. So he has read a lot of books. He has traveled to multiple places. He has had experiences and tortures and endured slavery. He has been kidnapped. He has studied in Rome. He has done all these amazing things. And now, sitting still back in his homeland, it's time for him to write.
Well, it's also kind of time for him to take a break.
Right.
Because I've done the math here. 1575 kidnapped, 5 years of slavery. So 1580 he gets out. And then it says in 1605 he published the first volume of Don Quixote, which is often considered the first modern European novel. So there's a good 25-year break there. I think it would probably take me about 25 years to get over being a slave for 5 years in Algeria.
Right.
So he took a long break, probably had a holiday, had a good square meal or two. I'm sure the slaves didn't get fed very well. But yes, then his mind turned to other things and he started to write. And actually, 25 years to write Don Quixote, that doesn't seem too crazy. It's not a small book. So he definitely dedicated a lot of time to writing. And if he's like anyone who's ever written any novel, he probably wrote it and then went back and rewrote it and stuff like that. But anyways, the first volume of Don Quixote, which is often considered the first modern European novel, came out in 1605. When we talk about a volume, it's usually when we're taking a longer work and we're breaking it down into smaller parts. Think of it kind of like a season of a TV show. Okay, a volume could be book size. It won't necessarily be quite short. It could be hundreds of pages, but it's not the full story. If you think of, the Harry Potter books, that would be a good example. I think there's 7 books?
I think 7. Maybe
7
8.
books. And we can think of each book as kind of a volume of Harry Potter's whole story, right? So the first one is his when he's a kid, and then the last one is as him as a young man, and we have different adventures, and each book kind of exists on its own, but we can also read the whole thing to get this huge grand tale. So that's kind of the idea. So basically, Don Quixote Part 1 came out in 1605, and it is often considered the first modern European novel, right? It's written as a novel. It doesn't have the influence of sort of religious writing or things like that. It's not about saints. It's not about great Greek heroes or the Trojan War. It's about a completely original character having a completely original story that just sort of exists on its own. It's not an explanation of any other religious idea from the past. It's just a story to be read for entertainment with interesting characters and interesting situations. That's why we would kind of think of it as a modern novel. His diverse experiences, that's Miguel de Cervantes' diverse experiences, I should say, from military engagements, the battle that he was in, to pirate encounters, being kidnapped, significantly influenced his writing.
I bet they did.
Yeah, it would be interesting to read Don Quixote now and see the things that happened to the Don in the book, but also go, hey, that's kind of like when Miguel Cervantes was in this situation. Of course, a writer's life and experiences will generally influence their works.
That's true, especially because a lot of times with a writer's ability to describe something, it comes from experiences they've had previously. Unless they just have a very, very vibrant imagination and can describe things, a lot of times writers have to do serious research on the topic of the story they're telling. Like if you're going to tell a story about being the captain of a ship, you're probably going to first make sure you know everything, do your research and know everything about what it is to be a captain of a ship and how to describe all the terms of captaining a ship. And you have to do that deep research. Well, his life was really his research, which is quite interesting, quite fascinating. He's one of those people who experienced a lot and then put it down, put pen to paper, put it down and put it out there for the world. He got to his second volume in 1615, so his second volume came along, was released in 1615, during a period marked by Spain's political and economic decline from its golden age. Golden age of a place is normally a time when they have the height of culture, the height of art, the height of financial stability or wealth, the height of development, so maybe inventions are very strong during that period. Just a really, really strong period. That's called the golden age of a place, right? So this was Spain's golden age coming to an end because there were political changes that were going on and the economy was declining, which means, well, things are not all that golden anymore. It's not perfect anymore. These historical contexts are crucial for understanding the novel's themes of idealism versus realism, as Don Quixote blends fantasy and madness with real historical events and social critique. So that's a lot of information. The historical context, the things that were going on around him in Spain during that time, provide the information, provide the context, provide the input for him to be able to give this background into his story, to give a little bit of depth or wealth to his story. Context, a lot of times, if you are trying to figure out what's going on in a story, in an article, you'll look at the context. You'll look at the sentences before and the sentences after and try to figure out what's going on in what you're reading. You find the context of it. And those are crucial for understanding the novel's themes of idealism being everything's perfect, everything's amazing. I am the best knight ever. I'm going to take on all the bad guys and fix everything. It's too much. It's ideal. In a perfect world, you could do these things. When you are talking about idealism, you're talking about that perfect world where everything goes perfectly, versus realism. Versus means against or compared to. So if you have two fighters in a boxing match, it would be, Liston versus Ali or something like that. And they're competing against each other. So his idealism is competing with his realism. Realism being, hey, everything is like this. The world is so perfectly like this right now. Everything is okay, but it's the story of what's really going on. It is the interpretation of what's around you as it really is, as opposed to the ideal of what it is. And that is what is in Don Quixote. And by doing that in the story, he blends, Cervantes blends, he mixes together, right? If you put something in a blender, you mix it together, you spin it together you put these separate parts like berries and a little bit of juice and a little bit of ice and maybe a couple of other fruits all together in a blender, and you mix it together to make your perfect smoothie. Here we're blending, mixing together perfectly fantasy and madness with real historical events and social critique. Critique being an analysis of what's going on during that time and an opinion about it. Normally, if you're critiquing something, you're not just going, yeah, this is what's happening. You're saying, this is what's happening and I don't like it, or this is what's happening and it's great.
This combination challenges traditional literary classifications. All right, so that last sentence kind of wraps everything up, especially when we're talking about the book and how important it is and how original and surprising and new it was at the time. Having this combination, fantasy with madness, blending that with historical events, having this, sort of investigation, this discussion of idealism and reality, this type of idea, all these ideas in the book. So this combination, it challenges traditional literary classification. So back at those times, no one had ever really written a book like this. And even today, obviously it's a novel, it's a fictional story, but Is it historical fiction? Is it kind of science fiction because he's imagining all these things? Is it comedy because there's quite a lot of funny stuff going on with Sancho Panza chasing him around? Is it a tragedy because Don Quixote is kind of a sad man in the fact that he's, completely under the control? He's a prisoner to his own fantasy world, his own mental illness as well. So that's what we mean by classifications, putting it in boxes, putting it in categories, describing it as a certain type of thing or a certain genre. It's kind of a little bit difficult with Don Quixote. Again, another testament to why it continues to fascinate people today.
Let's take a break right now. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher one more time.
所以回到故乡之后呢，他就决定想要尝试着写作了。接下来我们就看到第3段哦。第3段当中啊，我们提到在1605年的时候，他就出版了唐吉訶德的第1卷。那这个作品就被认为是现代欧洲小说的开山之作。我们在第3段第2句这个地方就要来看到一个补充说明的关系子句咯，因为这边很重要。1605年出版了第1卷 The First Volume， 逗点之后的which， 逗点之后也只能加which啦，或者是which。好，这边的第1本 which 到句尾的地方，当然which指的就是唐吉訶德传的第1卷，那就是大家觉得说哇，真的是一个很了不起的开山之作。因为啊，他本身作者的经历，形形色色的经历，比如说他在海军，然后呢遭受严重的伤害，然后又遭遇海盗，这些啊都影响了他的创作。那第2卷是什么时候问世呢？出现在第3段第4句的地方，到了1615年的时候，出现到了这个第2卷终于出版了。而当时西班牙因为经历了这种政治啊、经济衰落的一个时期，所以第2卷开始故事也很精彩。我们同样回到第3段第4句这个地方，有一个关系子句的简化哦。逗点之后的 during a period 这个地方是先行词 marked 到句尾请左右括号，那么它省略的是 which 或者是 that 跟 be 动词的 was 当时嘛，当时。那么在当时这个 period 就是我们刚说西班牙经历政治经济衰落的时期，所以这些历史背景都影响到唐吉訶德整个主题的描写，不管是小说当中的理想主义啦，或者是现实主义啦，甚至唐吉訶德他把幻想、疯狂跟真实的历史事件还有社会的批判全部都结合在一起了，所以这种结合其实挑战了传统的文学分类。我们明天还有更精辟的解说哦。我是安娜，我们明天见。
All right, so we have learned a lot about Miguel de Cervantes. Really fascinating person. I wanted to say character, but a character can be the case here. He is a man of a certain character, but he is a very fascinating person who has created this work of literature that is also really fascinating. We've gone through a couple of days of talking about it, and tomorrow we're going to return again, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth into really kind of the classification of it, figure out a little bit more how we should be looking at it when we read it. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.